Hi everyone. We have had around 300 registrations for this event, and we're just so deeply humbled that so many people have signed up and are interested in hearing a bit more about the many to many. So a huge welcome to you all. Yeah, just amazing to have you here. It's a full agenda, so I'm going to just get cracking so we have as much time to be spacious as possible. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to do an introduction to the team. I'll talk a bit about the many-to-many system, and then I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour of the website. Then we're going to take a moment to do some quick reflections. So we'll do this via Mentimeter. We'll give you the instructions once we get there. Then we're going to do 3 short presentations of where parts of the many-to-many system have been tested in context. So we're going to hear from James, Kathleen, and Annette. Then we'll take another moment to do some reflections. And if we have time, at the end, we'll do some Q&A. Let's see, we'll do our best to get there. What we will do is we've created a Mentimeter that we'll leave open. So you'll be able to submit your questions at least until the end of the day. So I know that solves the Q side, doesn't necessarily solve the A side. So just to give you a little bit of a story arc, we are in the final motions of booking an in-person event in March. So that'll be in the second half of March. And then there'll be an online event in preparation for that. So all of these questions, all of these reflections, they will feed into that, and we'll be able to do a more expansive experience then. So I haven't yet introduced myself, so I'm going to do that quickly now. So I'm Michelle. Annette, do you want to come off mute and just say hi so people can see your face?
Hello, I'm Annette.
Hey, perfect. And so Annette and I lead the initiative and co-steward this from the Dark Matter Lab side. Ariana unfortunately can't be with us today, but we have Gordain. Do you also want to say hi?
Hi everyone.
Great. And Ariana and Gordain have really led the work in taking all of the learnings that we've been making over multiple years and turning it into what you see. So information, diagrams, visuals, tech. So that whole stack has been part of their leadership. So Staff Matter Labs, we didn't do this alone. So there's a learning network. I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. You'll hear from James and Kathleen, but on the screen you can also see the other members of the learning network there. Lastly, just to point out, early on in this process, we had a group of what we called lead edge testers. So these were people who came along and really tried to push our thinking and push the boundaries of what might be possible. So a shout out to them. And of course, to say this has been supported by many fantastic organizations and foundations. So a hi from all of us. So let's talk about the many-to-many system. There's really just a couple of key concepts that I want to cover today because these underpin the crux of the work. So the many-to-many system aims to support collaborations who are tackling complex and entangled challenges where disrupting norms around value, ownership, and power is essential. And so when we talk about collaborations, we're talking about cross-disciplinary, cross-sector, potentially cross-jurisdictional, public, private, civic, like these collaborations that are very, very complex in nature, because they're trying to address the challenges, the big challenges we're facing as society. I could name dozens, but just as an example of a few, we could think about climate change, housing, or health. And it's for those collaborations who are saying, we have to find a different way to do this, because if we don't, we're just going to create the same old things. So it's built on one basic idea. And for many of you on this call, this is the field that you work in all day, every day. So this isn't going to be new to you. But the idea is to step into today's complex challenges. We need many diverse groups. We need to mobilize many different types of resourcing. We need to recognize that value comes in many forms. We need to bring in many perspectives. And so that's us who might be on this call or work in our fields, but it's also future generations and the natural world. And so that's where this idea of many to many comes from. Now, we know there are people already doing work It's not just us thinking about this. Of course, people have been doing this for a long time. The question we asked is, do those collaborations have the best structures to support their complex and dynamic work? And if we could create better supporting structures, would we actually unlock their ability to do more effective system level change? And so on top of that basic idea, I'll now introduce the idea of deep codes. So deep codes are these understandings that we all have of the world that are so deep within us that they end up becoming invisibly embedded within our structures, our frameworks, our rules, our laws. And of course, because they show up there, that then in turn shapes what we create and what we experience. And so we ask the question, which deep codes influence how we govern, how we collaborate, how we organize, that keep us locked in place, that stop us from being able to work in the ways that we would like to? And what would happen if we reimagined those deep codes? Could we ultimately end up with structures that become enabling rather than restrictive? So you'll see on this part of the slide, there's an image which shows the 3 core deep codes that we explored and a set of subsidiary deep codes around it. These are not intended to be exhaustive. We expect that they will change over time, and you may even look at them and immediately see ones that are missing. I won't have time to go into tons of detail today, but if you want to learn more about them, you can go to the website and have a look there. So that's kind of great in concept, but how do you go from a concept and try to bring that to life? Well, we did this through a proof of possibility. And the proof of possibility worked with these diverse partners, so this learning network, and we wanted to demonstrate that a collaboration could hold and strategically deploy a variety of resources toward a mission, towards a systemic mission. And it could do that in a way that shifted deep codes. So we did it in 2 stages. There's stage 1, which was creating the learning network. All of the organizations in that network have deep expertise in collaborative governance. And the network had 122,000 of cash and a mission. And the mission was to say, could you demonstrate that we could collectively steward this pool of assets and build the capacity for others to do complex governance? So the core inquiry, or the core challenge when we set out this work, was to say, could we develop a legally robust way to move money from multiple funders to multiple actors who were working on a shared mission? And I talk about this a bit more in the next slide, but one of the key reasons we focused here is because when collaborations get to the point where they want to bring on funding and bring in alternate sources of revenue, they're often required to formalize. So they're often required to have contracting or become an entity, so perhaps a not-for-profit, an association, any kind of entity. And when that happens, they automatically inherit a set of structures around governance and around organizing that they have to work with. So we wanted to explore, can we create a legally robust way for these groups of organizations to collaborate that doesn't require them to become an entity, with the idea that if we could do this, they may have more control over how they design their governance and supporting structures. So we tested it on ourselves. We did a live prototype, we built a governance structure, we built an organizing structure, we worked to allocate the 122,000, all with the idea that we could build something that others may wish to use in the future. And as part of it, we built many other assets, which is what shows up on the website. So there's decision-making practices, funding methods, methodology. And in our experiment, it ultimately culminated in a many-to-many contract. And the contract was really us looking to write down and codify what we wanted to do in this collaboration, how we wanted to do it, and where we were hoping to shift these deep codes. And then the members of the learning network tested components of it. We're going to hear 3 examples of this. We took parts of it, worked on it in their own context, broke some things, reimagined some things, and all of that got fed back into what you'll see today. So in terms of this slide, the key message is kind of really in the heading. So far, I've talked a lot about infrastructure, structure, governance, legal, but of course, that's not everything that a complex collaboration needs to be successful. And this diagram is looking to try and point to that fact. So complex collaborations are multidimensional, inherently human. It's everything, of course, from relationship building, trust, all the way through to conflicts or potentially working out when to close the collaboration down. We wanted to focus at a specific point, which is this point between where a group of collaborators have a social agreement, so they've agreed that they want to work together, and when that tips into something that's required to be more formal. And the main observation that drove this is that readily available forms and legal relationships often impose these deep codes that can run counter or be misaligned with what the collaboration wants to do. And so we don't think this is going to solve all of the challenges that complex collaborations have, but it's aimed at one particular sticking point. So we've talked about it. What is it and who is it for? So in some senses, you can think about it as a living library that's dedicated to complex collaborations. So the system, all of the material, it's really a gesture of learning out loud. And we wanted to create frameworks, practical learnings, insights, models, and share all of the tools we developed along the way. And sometimes it's nice to say what it's not. So it's not intended to be a finalized prescriptive solution. So it's an open sharing of a process that's still in progress. It might look neat and tidy, but of course, in order to make things navigable, they have to be simplified. So don't be fooled by the neat and tidy appearance. It's designed that you can take it in whole or in parts. So if there's one tiny part that feels relevant to you, you can use it and discard the rest. Or if more of it feels interesting, then that's totally great and available to you. We also wanted to be quite transparent. Not all of it is tested at the same level. So we've tried to name the developmental level for each of the tools or the examples or the case studies. And really just to say this whole body of work is offered under a Creative Commons license. And so now I think the most exciting part and the genuine open invitation is to break it, to reinterpret it, to improve upon it, or potentially even discard it entirely, to use it as a thought piece that might be relevant for you. So who is it designed for? The key content so far is most relevant to governance practitioners. Now, you may have other terminologies or concepts that you might prefer, but essentially what we're getting at is people who are already working in complex collaborations, who are really looking to find alternate governance and organizing structures for their work. In time, we would love to make this more accessible, but at the minute, it does require a certain level of literacy around governance type activities. But there are some others who we think this work is particularly relevant to. So that's funders, especially those who are seeking to disrupt their own investment strategies, particularly in relation to systemic initiatives, and also legal and financial professionals who are writing a lot of the agreements, who are structuring a lot of this work. These professionals are absolutely vital for the societal transformation that we're going through. So I just want to give one quick image of the many-to-many system and just briefly describe the layers. We wanted to take years of learning and digest it into something that you could see on one page, so you could start to kind of take it in and then give depth where people could explore at their own desire, at their own interest, and go deeper into it. I'm going to narrate it left to right, but of course, collaborations can enter at any point. There's all kinds of movement and it's very, very dynamic. But the narration in the linear sense is we wanted to spend a lot of time describing the intended context. So just like this isn't the only way for collaborations to do complex collaboration. It's our way, and we've tried to describe what might make it useful to some, but not others. The second step is to explore the deep codes. Not all deep codes can be shifted. That will be very context specific. And so it gives collaborators a way to understand some of the fundamental choices that they might make. We talk a little bit about how a tiered mission might be beneficial for some collaboration. There's a big chunk here in how do you steward a collaboration or a group of collaborators through different processes so that you can ultimately create the best possible conditions to build these infrastructures and build these alternate ways of governing and organizing and learning. This system blocker section is a coming soon, but there are a number of learnings we learned along the way, which is even if you do all of these things, you may still bump into blockers within the system that make things difficult or complicated. So our intention is to share these over time. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to take a moment and just do the whistle-stop tour of the website. So some of you may have been here. If not, this is the landing page. And it essentially just takes you through, at a high level, some of what I've explained so far. If you get to this point, there's essentially 6 different ways to enter into the system, or six different views. I've talked a bit about the system itself, that's the diagram. I've talked a little bit about how it was built, and I've talked a fair bit about the architectures and the structuring. So I just want to briefly show you what tools are available if you were to go in there and explore it a bit more. So if you were to go in to discover the system, there's a way to look at it with a real bird's eye view. So it allows you to see the whole system as well as some of the relationships between the different parts. But that's sort of at a much more superficial, easy to enter way. On the other hand, you can go into much more of a deep dive view. So this is our field guide. It's around 100 and something pages. And it's designed to be for practitioners who are saying, yeah, I really want to test and try some of this in my own context. So it's much more of a step-by-step guide. So that's a bit about the system. In terms of the journey and the team, I spoke about it super briefly. How is the many technique developed? You can dive in here and learn a lot more. But of course, there's an origin story to this work. There's a much broader context. There are many collaborators, many ideas that weave into this. And so that's where you can see some of that broader contextual information. And lastly, in terms of learnings, we learned all the way along the process. So this shares some of those. So it's not just the full website, but it's the more behind the scenes to get here. Lastly, in terms of the things that I've already presented, this is the area where we really delve into structures and in particular some of the legal architecture. And so there's 3 key documents that you can see here. This one here and this one here, they're both experiment logs. So we kind of used the terminology from science and said, okay, what's a way of thinking about writing down everything we did and everything we tried? So we've created these experiment logs. One is really focused on the stewardship process or the orchestration process. So what does it take to go through an experience like this? and end up with the conditions to be able to really think differently. I'd love to go into these, but I'm hoping to pique your interest. And I think they're documents and resources that are better developed, not better developed, beg your pardon, better explored by yourself. So that's the process orchestration one. The second one is all around the legal architecture. So this is the area, the legal areas we explored and how they connect to deep code shifts. So this covers a lot of different areas, but just to kind of hopefully whet your appetite, it's things like legal forms, like tax, decision making, who leaves, who joins, what happens in disputes, intellectual property, data, duties. So it covers a whole spectrum. And then lastly, I talked about this many-to-many agreement that our process culminated in. This is an example agreement that shows how we experimented with embedding deep codes into agreements. So that's that. There are three other areas that I'll quickly point to. One is the tools and examples. So these are all the tools we developed along the way. Obviously, I won't go into all of the details now, but just as one example, one of the core deep codes was to shift the idea of what is valuable. And so there was a tool we developed in this collaboration that said, how can we map different assets, particularly non-tangible assets? So if you wanted to, you could click here. This would open a Miro board and it would be something you could look at and use pieces of if it was relevant for you. Next, there's learnings from the field. So at the moment, it's a very conceptual thing. So I've presented, here's a system and here's how it works. But actually, this section is about saying, well, how did it work in practice? So there's case studies that we've developed here, and then there's top tips. So these come from the members of the Learning Network, and they're sharing their perspectives both on implementing the many-to-many, but also from their own much broader, complex collaboration governance work. So there's a real plethora of information in here that's super valuable. And then lastly, there's navigate challenges. So far, I've been talking about it from here's the system and here's how you can enter and here's how we've architected it. But for many, you may just have a problem that you want to explore. And so this is taking this really from the challenge angle. So these are some common challenges that people might experience in this kind of work. And if we just click on one, it gives a short summary of what the challenge is. But what it does then is links to the parts of the system that have been designed to try and overcome some of these challenges. So it allows you to go in challenge first. It also curates the specific tools and examples that are linked to this challenge, so you don't have to go through all of them. And lastly, in the field guide, where we're going in this deep step-by-step process, throughout that document, we draw key insights and we draw areas of alert. So these things we say, look, we bumped into this, maybe you want to watch out. These have been curated on this page so that they're specifically relevant to the specific challenge. So that's the end of a whirlwind tour, some conceptual stuff, some website stuff, tools. What I'm going to do now is open up the Mentimeter and give you all a moment to kind of digest that and to give us your reflections. So let me go back to the beginning. You can use the code here. You can use the QR code, and Gaudain has also popped a direct link in the chat. So if you prefer to do that, you can. Just give people a couple of moments to get in. So if you're not in, that's okay. That code is in the chat from Godane. For those who are in, here is an opportunity for you to tell us what you found most interesting about the system. I'll just put a timer on this, give us another minute. Wow, fascinating to see what people are saying. All right, so we're just a couple more seconds and then I'll head on. It looks like it's slowed down a little bit. So let's head on to the next slide. What did you find most challenging about the many-to-many system? Again, I'll give us a little timer there. Not surprising, finding an entry point is a big one. Yeah, I think speaking quite honestly, this was one of those things we is difficult. So yeah, and same with the complexity and language. Yeah, really good feedback. Great. So I've just got a few more seconds and then I'll head on to the last one. Like a countdown. All right. Next question. This one's a bit easier. On the website, the most useful information for me is, and you can pick multiple here. We'll give us another 30 seconds just to give everyone a moment. This is such useful feedback. It really gives us a chance to think about any future versions of the website and where to focus our attention next. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. So that's the last that you will hear from me. So I'm going to stop sharing. Maybe not the last you hear from me from the whole session, but for now, I'm going to hand over to James, and James is going to take us through one of those examples. I'll leave that to him, and then Kathleen, and then Annette. So James, are you up and ready for it?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, suitably daunted and nervous. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Is that coming through?
Yes, we've got it.
Okay, Cool. Um, okay, I'll thank you everyone. It's such an honor to have been part of this cohort. I just want to kind of say that up front, and particularly the deep craft actually from the Beyond the Rules team. It's yeah, it's been pretty awe-inspiring actually. So yeah, a little bit about me. My name's James. I co-founded a worker-owned, worker-led organisation in 2005 here in Sheffield in the UK. And a lot of our work, we're a portfolio organisation, so a lot of our work is lots of different types of projects working in different domains towards systemic change and transitions here in place. And nearly all of our work is some form of multi-actor collaboration. And we tend to work across different scales. So we're doing some work in the River Don project, which is looking at the civic capabilities for bioregional governance. We're doing some work at the city and neighbourhood and community scales around storying, convening, and more recently around collaboration infrastructures towards the Sheffield City goals, which are a set of transition goals over the next 10 years. So I'm going to speak a little bit about some of those things and how we've kind of grounded them in some of this work. Um, so, yes, collaboration unlocks projects, not the other way around. Um, so Sheffield, like I imagine many other places, faces challenges that are complex, intersecting, and compounding. And those challenges often don't arrive one at a time. They kind of show up together, they interact, they create lots of turbulence and harm that make it incredibly hard for projects, even well-designed, well-intended projects, to take root. And so one thing we've learned through experience is that in a context like this, it's not projects that unlock collaboration, it's collaboration that unlocks projects. And that projects really only flourish when the system around them can hold them. And that requires us to build collaboration infrastructure. So shared sense making, relational trust, distributed leadership, distributed decision making, intergenerational responsibility, ways of working across very different lived realities. And crucially, we need that infrastructure to hold both plurality and coherence together. Plurality, of course, because diverse perspectives, cultures, knowledge systems, lived experiences, skills are where good decisions and innovation come from. But coherence, because without translation and alignment, that plurality can fragment. And that's really where the many-to-many system has been really helpful for us. And it's given us a way of thinking about how to build the conditions for that, but also a way of diagnosing the kind of readiness of a system for that. So I guess that's why when we accept that working in complexity, we also kind of accept that the work that we're doing together changes and behaves slightly differently. So complex work is, I'm sure many of you know, is relational, unpredictable, multi-layered. It doesn't move in straight lines. It doesn't obey project plans, certainly none that I've managed to write. And so traditionally, when we kind of think about complicated problems, I suppose, building a jet engine, for example, we might think about how we control the environment to get to the outcome. Whereas in complex problems, we're building the conditions for collaboration before control. We're building conditions for learning before governance, conditions for sense making before decision making, and conditions for readiness before formalization. And again, this is what the many-to-many system with all its different tools has helped us to do. And it's provided this kind of operating logic, I suppose, for how we sense, learn, align, sequence, and govern in a way that holds difference and adaptation really well. One of the key bits for me actually in the learning cohort was the idea that the value isn't actually in the parts, it's what becomes possible when they work together. And you know, without doing any kind of disservice to the many-to-many system, there isn't any one single tool or technique that does the lifting, right? It works because of the combinatory effects between different parts of that system. So while the learning system might help us make sense of what's emerging and surfacing patterns that we wouldn't necessarily see alone, or the organizing system turns that insight into alignment, roles, and commitments at the pace that the system is ready for. Um, None of those elements on their own are particularly critical. It's actually the affordance that comes from all of them. And so kind of want to sort of draw out, so I missed out the strategy there and the legal governance architecture. So all of those components together really provide this kind of affordance, which is incredibly helpful. One of the things that was really critical for me actually was in the contracting of wide boundary and narrow boundary missions. Um, I've been following some of the work that's come out of the Consilience project from Daniel Schmachtenberger and also Vanessa Andreotti in the Outgrowing Modernity work, and they both talk about wide and narrow boundary intelligences. And so to kind of see that field of work, I suppose, represented in formal contracting, I thought was pretty impressive. And I've just tried to kind of create an illustration of how we might use that work in a Sheffield context. So we've got these kind of wide boundary missions effectively that come from the Sheffield City Goals, and you can see those kind of 6 stories there. And there are 18 goals that kind of underpin them. And then the narrow boundary mission that come from the collaboration infrastructures that we're working to stand up and build at the moment. So that participatory action across 147 neighbourhoods here, a data co-op that holds shared sense making and accountability, a new form of transition financing that really tries to flow capital into different forms of value, and the next generation's infrastructure is bringing young people into decision making and shaping intergenerational governance and reciprocity. So what we're kind of seeing here is this kind of ability to hold the tension of a wide boundary mission that can hold all the plurality and the narrow boundary missions that drive the coherence. And I just think that to be able to contract into that is a really helpful tool. We used some of the tools that have been named, so I just want to kind of draw a few of those out here. This was in the River Don project, which has got 9 different partner organizations in it, different types of structure as well. So we used the asset mapping to make visible those multi-capitals that different organizations and people were bringing into the space, whether that was deep relationship or networks, or whether it was, harder material or financial assets as well. And then we used the kind of role mapping to help us create shared clarity about how we each really wanted to show up and what roles we wanted to hold in showing up together. And that helped us really reduce confusion and make collaboration, I think, safer between the 9 organizations. And then we did some work on risk mapping as well, which was, again, really helpful. And I think important as well to take a kind of multi-capital view on risk in a way. So risk to relationships, risk to reputation, risk to the trust, I guess. And that really helped us understand how we could balance risk and how we could locate agency and decision making proportionately to the risk that was being held by different actors, which I think was a much more dynamic way of thinking about traditional kind of governance or hierarchy, I suppose. And I wouldn't say that these tools helped us get to particular answers, but I do think they helped us diagnose a certain kind of state of where we were in the governance. And we also did some formalization of contracting in this work as well. So I guess, yeah, a critical piece of learning that came out of this. And even this morning, actually, I found myself being pulled in the opposite direction to what I'm about to say now, which is kind of interesting to feel those deep codes in action. But this idea that really we should let governance follow readiness, not the other way around. And I think using those sort of loops of sensing, noticing, learning, aligning, governing really helped us kind of understand and diagnose where the system was in a particular way. And that helped us understand what was possible in terms of like delivery options into particular parts of the project, and really helped us kind of think about what a proportionate, adaptive and grounded form of governance in that moment was for a group of multi-actor organizations. And it meant that we have avoided some of the kind of risks of an imposed governance or a performative governance as well. And then just finally, I want to just give a kind of huge shout out actually to the deep codes. I think when you read them, they just kind of often feel quite simple, but actually like grounding them. And there's an elegance, right, to the language that's been used. So I don't want to just that's incredible work, but they just set a foundation from which the whole thing flourishes. And certainly in my experience, they've really helped me learn, a bit more about how to surface power, value, commitment across the system, including many forms of capital and the often unseen labor, care, and authority that shape how collaborations actually happen. And they've helped me create coherence through shared mission and not uniformity, um, enabling different actors, identities, practices to work together without flattening difference. And I think that's often something that we end up doing inadvertently is flattening difference, which of course reduces innovation in many ways. And I think probably most critically, they've helped me learn to balance risks and harm by making it really explicit who is holding what. Because when roles, labor, and responsibility are invisible, risk becomes invisible too. And naming those dynamics allows us to share agency proportionately and to recognize also the risk of inaction as part of our decision landscape. Yeah, and I guess the final point on this slide is about those learning loops. And I think when I think about the development of this work going forward, for me, the bit that I'm most interested in is those learning infrastructures and how do we develop the kind of rhythms of that learning and that signal spotting and that convening, presumably around what's being learned in order to adapt and make good governance decisions. So I think that's something that I'm really, really passionate about learning more about as well. Um, yeah, that's it from me, but I hope that was helpful. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, James. Um, Always love hearing your reflections. Kathleen, we always love hearing your reflections too. So can we also jump over to you and have you share your screen and take us through?
I'll come off mute first. That's always helpful, isn't it? So thanks everyone, and thanks James for that really lovely broad picture of Opus and how you've used many-to-many. I'm really excited to be here today, and I'm going to share how I've used the many-to-many collaborative approach to a specific bit of contracting in locomotion to give you maybe an example of how you can use it in different ways. And also, I think it's a real privilege, I think, to be able to explore how structures do reflect, the values and aspirations to do something differently. And that's where I think many-to-many really unlocks something for me. But first, it's probably helpful, isn't it, to tell you a little bit about locomotion and what it is. So locomotion in this exists to reimagine a just and collaborative future for communities. We're a long-term collaboration that's focused on community-led change. And we're about bringing together 6 communities and 5 funders to support collaborative community-led action and systems change that really gets to the root causes of social justice issues. So together, what we really want to do is support and help shape how change happens in Carmarthen, in Enfield, in Lincoln, in Middlesbrough, in Oldham and Torbay, and also within the funders, City Bridge Foundation, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, Kelly Chase Foundation, Lloyds Bank Foundation and Paul Hamlin Foundation. And we're trying to create spaces and networks for collaboration and connections and to build local leadership and capacity that would drive and sustain lasting transformation. So, we really believe that deeper collaboration leads to deeper, more lasting change. And one of the things that it's important to say, given that I'm talking about how we've done a collaborative contracting approach, is that locomotion isn't a legal entity. And I think that that's really important to bear in mind, because that's kind of one of the ways that I think many-to-many has helped us navigate a contract for services. So when I first came across many-to-many, I was really excited because although we'd already done a lot of work in contracting and locomotion, co-producing agreements that brought in our values and that were really explicit about how we wanted to work together, and a single grant agreement, which any of you who've ever worked with funders will know is no mean feat in itself, I still felt like there was a way to support even more deeper relational type contracting that sort of helped us contract across power boundaries rather than reinforcing them. And so, as someone that often jumps into complexity and will work it out as I go, what I found the many-to-many framework, and particularly the kind of contractual framework that we were experimenting with, really helped me do was kind of lean into that and actually help me have a structure to make sure that I covered all of the bases. So what I'm going to talk about, and let me just share the slide so that you can see who else was involved in this work with me, is the Deep in Place and Practice Collective. I'll get that on the slideshow so you can see everybody. So these are the people that I was contracting with. I don't think that's showing up, is it? So I might leave that to someone else to help me with, but it's not working with me to technology today. But the Deep in Place and Practice Collective is essentially 8 other people, some of whom are organizations, some of whom are sole traders, plus myself and the fiscal host of Locomotion, because as I mentioned, we're not constituted organization. So when I was building this collaboration, what I really wanted to do was prototype an approach that would help grow leaders, really, that would support people, a network of local change makers to become, leaders who could support other people. So as you can see, it's kind of really adaptive. We needed to be adaptive and to move from the development phase sort of seamlessly into delivery and give people enough that they could contract, but space enough that we could iterate and develop. And that was something that normal contracting approaches didn't help. Oh, thank you very much. So these are the lovely other people involved. I won't read out all of those names. And in terms of enabling me to unlock a sort of deeper change in how we were contracting, I think one of the really important things to bear in mind is that essentially, I saw the contract as a way to flip the switch on this lead contractor model that funders love to use. You can take the slide away now, please, if that's all right. And then I can see more of your lovely faces. And to do something that was much more collaborative and equitable between all of the partners in the collaboration. So, really wanted to bake equity into the contract, not kind of try and fit ourselves into a contractual framework that didn't work. Because the DIP Collective is essentially a developmental learning and support approach, which needed to iterate and adapt as it progressed, as I said. So I've mentioned Locomotion is unconstituted, and that creates some complications in terms of legal contracting, because I needed enough structure to be able to convince my national fiscal host, who is one of the national foundations, that it wasn't only sort of workable, but actually preferable to contract in this way, and that it was really fulfilling our ethos. So we'd already, as a DIP Collective, done the work on the dreaming of, what we wanted to be and how we wanted to be. But the contract really helped me just have a framework to test against of, have I hit all of these things so that I can create a contract that gives enough certainty and enough safety with enough freedom, a kind of liberating structure, if you will, that let us get on with the sort of creative work. So the many-to-many framework really helped me be brave and lean into this idea of creating a contract that sort of shifted or deconstructed even the usual lead contractor model and do something that was much more collaborative. Now, I don't know about you all, but it's not often in my work of many years of different partnerships and collaboration that people are effusive about how you've gone about creating a contract and about the contract you have. So I asked my lovely collaborative partners who you saw on the slide, what is it about many-to-many in this contract and approach we use that sort of, what did it open up for you and what did that look like? And there were 3, I think, really important things to cover. Relational trust, comfort and safety, or I might frame that as courage and vulnerability, and equity. So the things that people said, and I'm keeping an eye on time, Michelle, so will you wave to me when I'm getting sort of to my 10 minutes so that I don't go over? So relational trust really is the foundation. So we've done that work, but also what the many-to-many framework, and people were brave when I said, hey, let's try something a bit different here. What that enabled is, somebody said, I was really excited that we had the courage to say what we need, what truly represents us doesn't exist, so let's create it. And that's from somebody who was a contract lawyer in a previous life and is now does sort of community development and theatre and all sorts of other things. And also that the relational trust is just as important as the structure, because the approach truly represented our collaborative ethos. I'm sorry, I hope you can't hear my dog whining in the background. Just means it's a really important point. So, you know, that relational trust was the foundation of everything. And the second thing I think is about courage and vulnerability, because what this did is it really enabled us to offer that bit of comfort and safety. So, you know, in two ways, really. I think the framework and the process that we followed through the framework helped create an openness for people to explore what might be possible. And the content helped create a bit of trust and a bit of safety, that we weren't flying without a kind of, you know, parachute here. We actually had something that could hold us in this. So what my colleague said is that the approach helped us create transparency and openness, which let me step into it and be okay with discomfort. And I think that was really important because we were trying to do something different here. And the contract feels like a living, breathing partner, a part of the collective relationship instead of rules and threats that are ready to pounce. Now, for me, that was really interesting because actually, I think there's a lot of legality in here and legal safety, but that feeling that it was relational and it was keeping us safe rather than kind of, you know, there to make sure that the funder was okay if it all went wrong, I think was really powerful. And I'll finish on comfort and safety in that my fiscal host said, "Oh, can we get this contract just checked out by a lawyer?" Perfectly sensible, you know, let's do that. And the lawyer said, "It's like a contract, only not." And that made me laugh quite a lot. But actually, it was in terms of the comments, it was really just a little bit more clarity. And I have to say, it was the most minimal amount of comments I've ever seen on any contract I've done in the collaborative space, because it had really helped me. As I say, someone often jumps in, really helped me kind of think about all of the different things that I needed to hit. And then equity. I mean, what was really important about this is that we had people at different levels of their experience in the partnership. Some were like, you know, in an organization, some were sole traders. And it sort of really helped us think through contributions and the related costs and money flow. And any of you who are self-employed will know that's quite an edgy conversation, right? About, you know, day rates, what that looks like, what the flow is. And one bit of feedback I got is that I genuinely felt that the range of our unique contributions were valued equally, so that we could hold a range of needs and parity in the partnership. And that was really powerful for people because it let us be really explicit about what people were bringing that was more than just their daily rate. And also it let people kind of, one of the things in this deep kind of systemic work I found is that we sometimes need to let people be able to contribute with what they can give, not, you know, expecting everything and expecting everyone to be in everything. And actually it really let people talk about that in a kind of more constructive and helpful way. So to start summing up, to me, the framework and the set of tools, particularly that contractual framework, it sort of really helped me lean in to trying something different. And as I say, you still need to do all the relational and trust building work, but it allowed me to be braver and more vulnerable than those I was working with to do that too, because we were signing something here that was adaptable, and where all of the contractual answers in what was essentially a prototype weren't available at that time or weren't all tied down. So it really brought forward that clarity on the tricky topics more upfront. And, you know, contribution, money flows, decision making, intellectual property, that might have been easy to miss or avoid in that excitement of building something new. You know, I love to be in that space of building something new. This helped us really put the right container around it. And the most important thing for me that this really enabled was it let me contract whilst we were still building the prototype. And I think that that's really important for the kind of work that we all do, because it seamlessly helped us move from development to delivery to including iteration in the work. And I think that was really important because we knew the model of what we wanted to do, but we didn't know how it would work in practice, and we didn't know what we might need to shift along the way. So that's where I think this framework opens up real possibilities to bring enough certainty to help people get on with the work of untangling complexity. You know, there's a lot of sort of nuance and complexity in the work. We were working across national, local, across silos and sectors. And I really felt that this many-to-many framework just let us breathe. It let us take a minute to breathe and to create an agreement that fitted our circumstances, rather than trying to fit into some outdated model of contracting that didn't really serve our needs or indeed the dream of what we were trying to create. So for me, it was a really sort of powerful structure that liberated us to try and do something different. So I'll stop there. I think that was probably about the 10 minutes.
It was about bang on. So thank you so much, Kathleen. That's amazing. And last but definitely not least, we will hear from Annette. She's going to give us a slightly shorter case study, but still very juicy and interesting. So yeah, over to you.
Thanks so much. And thank you, James and Kathleen. It's been such a pleasure to learn with you through all of this. Yeah, I'm going to do a shorter one, and I'm going to do it from a slightly different angle to show the application of an example of this in a context of building the conditions for alternative funding, and how we've kind of used some of the many-to-many system in a context like that. So the example is about a complex collaboration that was seeking to build and nurture alternative futures in the UK, and needed to shift norms in power and value and risk and ownership, as well as assumptions of how change happens, particularly from the lens of money flows, and how money is channeled towards the practice of building alternative futures. So I'll share a little bit about how we applied parts of the many-to-many system to that work, including in securing sign-off of an approach for a kind of practice-led, ecosystem-governed funding approach. So first of all, just to contextualize this a bit, and I'll refer to the types of complex collaboration model that we have in the field guide. This particular collaboration was one that was working with the Edge. So it was Edge actors who, it wasn't place-based, it was across the UK in this context, wanting to build alternative futures. And the funding approach was initiated with practitioners, but in deep collaboration from the outset with a team from a supportive funder. So that funder had initiated the practitioner ecosystem, and then the practitioner ecosystem initiated the alternative funding approach as a way to nourish the wider field. So there was this collaboration across these varied practitioners across the country, and within the funding organization, with mutual buy-in to kind of really see what alternative deep codes would be needed in how it would be held and structured. But the ultimate decision makers of that funding organization weren't present in it, which, you know, in philanthropic foundation, it's the trustees. So one of the deep codes that we discussed earlier was about building a strategic muscle within practitioners in the field themselves to kind of enable a field of practitioners to allocate resource to strategic areas of practice by practicing, learning, analysing results, seeing what that meant, and then moving to execute, with the idea of kind of shortening the learning loops and locating strategy around this closer to practice. And what that meant from the funder perspective was also that it would need to allocate some of its resource towards the ecosystem without knowing upfront specifically what that ecosystem was going to want to fund, because it was inherently about learning, emerging through learning. So it would do, learn, do, and so it wouldn't know at the outset what was going to need to be funded. And so it was quite a different approach, and that ecosystem didn't want to create an institution and then inherit a set of institutional deep codes and this kind of need for self-preservation. It wanted to exist outside of a formal structure. So that was some of the context. So some of the questions were, of course, like how can and should we deeply code this approach to enable a strategic field of practice? But also there was this kind of catch-22 in the scenario, because the practitioners needed to know that in order to justify the time and commitment of coming together across a set of practitioners to build an alternative design, that there would be resource available, because otherwise they could spend loads and loads of time reimagining this, and then it not actually manifest afterwards. But in order for that resource to be committed, the trustees that would need to sign it off would need to know what would that design be and how would it be appropriate for fiduciary duties, for, you know, Charities Commission rules and other things that they have to monitor and steward as part of their roles in protecting questions of risk.
Quick
So part of the
question,
question
Annette.
was, yeah.
Are you, we were only seeing or certainly for me, only seeing the first slide, but I think I know that you have drawn images of this. So just.
Okay. Sorry, I did not know that. Thank you. I can't see the slide that you can see. I have been flipping through them. So, okay, let me stop sharing and I'll reshare again and see if this helps.
I just know that particular image to be quite helpful to your narrative, if you can bring it up.
Thank you for flagging. Right, let's try. Okay. Hopefully this will work better this time. So the one that I shared before was this one, just so that you're remembering. Yeah, so I shared this one where I was trying to allocate, where I was trying to show how this fit in relation to the image on the field guide about types of complex collaboration. But so this was the one that I just spoke to. So how would we navigate the catch-22s? I'll now talk a little bit about how we applied some parts of the many-to-many system of this. So I guess, as I mentioned, you know, the context was this practitioner and funder kind of collaboration, working with Edge. One of the key deep codes that it was trying to embed was evolution through learning, but it was also looking at like how we think about risk and power and where strategy sits in these sorts of setups. And one of the key things it was looking at was this practitioner kind of ecosystem-led governing model. So then we started thinking about, okay, how do we approach this catch-22 situation? So I guess what we did was we utilized part of the many-to-many contracting and governing prototype as a way to quickly build a coherent example of what that type of practice-led ecosystem governing model could look like, that could then be shown to trustees, who in this case are the kind of they're risk holders in the system and need to understand what the implications are for these types of models. Not necessarily for that model that we lifted from the example from the proof of possibility to be the end one, because the proof of possibility example was very context dependent, right? And it's not intended to be a model that's just lifted and applied in lots of places, because each context will have a different need and will need to be tailored, and it will need to be built from what's specific to that. But by able to bring a smaller group who could, in quite a quick way, lift that prototype, adapt it, and share it to the trustees as an example of like, this is what this could look like. And in this example, this is how questions of fiduciary risk and, you know, how this would meet Charities Commission regulation and other things that you need to consider, this is how it would work, was enough then for them to be able to think through that and then sign off on a principle basis the ability to move resource towards that idea of a practitioner ecosystem-led governing model. And the end result didn't need to be the example that we shared, as long as it was whichever end model it would be as rigorous in thinking about how it met those different kind of duties that were required. And I guess what that did was it meant that what could otherwise probably have been quite a long and kind of process from the start through to the point of sign off, it was about 9 months, I guess, for them to be able to sign off in the kind of 5 to 10 million region of funding towards the space. And then after that point, the ecosystem had the conditions to say, okay, now it makes sense to put the real considered time and attention together into thinking, okay, if this isn't the final model we use, what is the system? What's the infrastructural system that we're going to need to put in place? Hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's not the most linear example, but I guess a way of how having this example of an existing type of many-to-many governing and contracting system has enabled the ability to unlock conditions that otherwise would have been really hard to unlock. And I guess just to give a little bit of insight into some of the things that we took from the prototype versus some things that we kind of evolved a bit from the prototype when we submitted the design. It took various things like the infrastructure model elements, that's that diagram that James shared in his presentation. This idea of like a mission space where parties could enter and exit without invalidating the contract, like that was quite a key part in the design of it. It was a multi-party contract with a fiscal host. Kathleen spoke a bit about that element was used. There are these kind of contractual role cards that make sure that care to critical areas are maintained throughout fluidity. That bit was used. But then we evolved some certain bits in the design, like we had a much more nuanced governance policy with specific circles and more decision-making protocols, because it was a much more multi-party context than the original example was made in. And we embedded a much more generous learning infrastructure budget to really be able to build that strategic muscle. So that just gives maybe a bit of insight into some of the things we lifted and also some of the bits we changed in that first process. And I guess to say, like, this is still in process, as in progress. The funding's been signed off, as I said. The learning infrastructure is now starting, but the fund isn't live yet. So this is an example in progress, and we'll see how this kind of influences the end result afterwards, but hopefully gives a bit of an interesting insight. So that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annette. That's amazing. So we're quite close to the end of the time, but I am going to open up the Mentimeter again, just to give you all a chance to give us your reflections on a different set of questions. So let me just load that up. And so this is now starting to understand a little bit based on what you've heard. And I take the point, and there was a comment in the comments, which was like, hey, I haven't had a chance to explore. Definitely understand this. So this is just your instinctual reactions. But we would love to understand if there are any parts of the many-to-many system, based on what you heard from the others, and also from me, that you could imagine trying out some of these components in your own system. So I will add a little 30 seconds to us, just to give us a chance to respond. And just while I'm on this screen, I just want to say a huge thank you to the people who presented, really brought the idea to life. So thanks again. Great. All right. So a couple more seconds. The next slide is where to from here. Now, we can't promise to do everything that you request, but it is good to get an indication of what might be desirable next. So this is a three-part question. And on the next slide, we'll give you an open text box to be able to let us know where you want to go to from here. All right, that seems to have slowed down. So here is an open text box. So what would you most like to see next? Yeah, super nice. These are great. Oh, it's really exciting. We've had quite a lot of these ideas, but haven't known which ones people have been motivated by. So this is really good. I'll just give us another 30 odd seconds to put a few more in. Wonderful. So the next slide is what questions do you still have? I'm actually going to close this now. So I'm going to stop presenting because there's a couple of ways we want to do this. So first of all, I think we've done a decent job of answering the questions as they've been coming up in the chat. So I guess I said we weren't going to get to the A, but maybe we are getting a bit more to the A as part of the Q&A. And the second thing is Gaudain was going to be looking through the chat to just identify if there was any questions that kind of kept coming up. So just to give you an opportunity, if there was one burning question, Gaudain. If not, I can just open up the other channel.
I think I think we have been answering the question, and thanks everyone for putting these great questions. But I think there's been something about people asking like, hey, is this for me? Or am I too noob enough for this? I think you can talk about, what is a practitioner if I'm not from legal or finance background? Like, is this for me? And, what is informal, complex collaboration? I see. Yeah, maybe you can start with that.
Yeah. For many of us who were working on this, we don't have those formal qualifications either. So we're not necessarily lawyers or financial professionals. I think it's much more about a person who is at the point where they're trying to do it in practice. So that can come from a variety of backgrounds. That can, there's no kind of limitations in that regard. It's more about the idea that in order to find it valuable and useful, you probably have to dig quite deep because the devil is actually in the detail and the nuance is in the detail. And so I think that's what I mean when I'm saying you need a fair level of commitment to kind of delve in. But I think anyone can do it if this is what you're working on and you have a desire to dive in. And like Kathleen said, in complexity, you jump in and work out how to do it later. I think that's definitely a good spirit as well. So I'm going to close this out because we have 1 minute. I will go back to sharing my screen just to give you a couple of spaces to go to. The first one is to say thank you. Let's just do this. So first one is to say thank you. If the best way to stay in touch with us is via the newsletter. So if you head across to the website, it's on the bottom of every single page. You can sign up to the newsletter and we'll give you updates about everything that's happening. I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll just re-say it again here. The intention is to have an in-person event in March, the second half of March, and to have an online event as a lead up to that event in person. So we'll be talking about that in the newsletter. So that's the best way to stay in touch. And we have a different Mentimeter. So if you still have questions that you want to ask, this will stay open until the end of the day. And so you can use this one, you can go in. Gaudain has also put a link in the chat. Yeah, let us know what you're thinking. And again, just to say, these questions we hope to answer over time, but particularly to help inform us on how do we make the best possible in-person event and design the agenda for all of that and to create the experience that would be most helpful for you all and for anyone who joins. So it's not going to go into a black hole. If you submit it, we will definitely be looking at it. So that is it. It's a big thank you to everyone. Thanks to the presenters. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for spending your time with us. Yeah, it was really wonderful to have you all here.
Thank you.
Bye.